Welcome back to Wednesday Night Fightback. Now, the Governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, has described the UK's growth outlook as the worst he's ever seen. Michael, is there anything you can think to try and correct this?
Well, yes, indeed, William. But look, before I start on what may actually turn out to be a bit of a rant, a little bit of a rant, I think I should make it clear to everyone looking at this that I don't make SDP policy. So that however much, you may think I either have good ideas or crazy ideas, William, I'm not a policymaker here. I'm just a suggestion. That having been said, it is absolutely plain that Britain's growth prospects are hampered enormously by its housing shortage. And the simplest and most effective way to deal with any lack of growth is to deal with that housing shortage. And I know that the SDP has been very strong on this and has proposals to build loads of houses. But William, what I've got to say is I think you're being far too conservative. I think the party should commit to basically solving this problem. Say, look, that's why we're in power right now. For the next 5 years, we are going to solve this housing problem, and we're going to solve it by building and building massively. And I'm thinking something along the lines of about 500,000 new homes every year.
I think, I agree with the sentiment entirely, and we have some very, very good housing policy. On the numbers, we are currently proposing 100,000 new units a year, and I'll explain why, and that may not satisfy you, but I'll explain why. The reason for it is we've got the mechanism. I asked the policy team for three things. I wanted the money, the entities to build the houses, and the powers. And presently, the total number of homes built completed a year ranges from about 180,000 to 200,000, which is completely inadequate.
Well, actually, it's lower than that. Between 2010 and 2023, excluding the pandemic period, we're averaging only 165,000 a year.
Yeah, and and the private sector does the vast majority of those, and there's about 30,000 for the registered social landlords. But basically, the story, you cut to the chase, the story of house building collapse in the UK is the story of the destruction of the state sector in this. We could learn from the post-war period when the state was actively involved. Now, what we've done is we've created these, as a proposal, these entities, the county housing development corporations, which are like the development corporations in the 80s that Thatcher brought in, have all the powers, but are singularly tasked with housing. Now, it may be that we have to revise our proposal up, because we were proposing 100,000 homes a year, which in a period of a parliament would house about 1.5 million people. I don't think that's enough. We are going to have a look at it. But the reason we started off with this figure of 100,000 was that we thought that was realistic given the capacity. And I just think we need to bear in mind that if we have a proposal, at the moment, I'll give you an example, Michael. So I love your proposal of 500,000 new homes a year, but that would be, trebling the capacity, and we don't have the skills to do it. So we'd have to build the skills. We have to actually get people skilled up.
Oh, to hell with that. Seriously, I think 100,000 is pathetically small. It doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of the problem. And just to kind of, remind everyone of where we've been, you don't actually have to go. During the 1950s, we were building about 280,000 a year.
300,000 in good years, yeah.
Yeah. 300,000. But look, before the wars, during the Depression, for goodness sake, 5 years before the war, before the Second World War, we were averaging, 333,000 a year. So the idea that we're stretching capacity at 100,000 a year is pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. Now, if we don't have the capacity now, then you give the industry a year. Say, you've got a year to do. You should be devoting massive amounts of your profits to training and expanding your workforce. You should be going around factories and saying, look, there's going to be loads and loads of demand for prefab stuff. You've got to get your capacity up. And then you can do this. And again, as you know, I often go back to the early years of Singapore with Goh Keng Swee, the sainted and revered Goh Keng Swee, who...
I am the committee.
Who said, I am the committee, we're going to do this. And in a single year, he put forward, I think, more social housing than the previous 30 years of British government rule. It can be done. But if you recognize this as Britain's fundamental problem, and you say, we're going to deal with it. And I don't care if we're going to upset the NIMBYs. I don't care if we're going to stretch the labour market. We'll have to do it. And we don't care if if these housing companies just want to sit on their housing, on their land banks. We'll tax them. We're going to do it. Whatever it takes, this is going to be done. And I'll tell you why. And here I am beginning to rant. If you continue to have this level of failure in the housing market, then there's several things can't happen. One, you're not going to get household formation. You're going to get fewer marriages, more unstable society. You're going to get fewer household formations, which means a slump in demand across a wide range of products and services.
I agree.
Secondly, and probably even more importantly, you're going to have this continued immobility between generations and between regions, which stifles everyone's potential, cuts the productivity of the entire country, and just does an enormous amount of damage. So I think, if I could wave a magic wand and come and sort of get some big boots on and go to your policy committee, I would say, make this your absolute headline thing. Saying, look, it's our one aim. This is the problem, the biggest problem that Britain's got, and we will solve it.
I'm very, very keen on addressing the problem. I think I talk about it a lot. I think it's a massive priority. And you speak to any young person, and it's not, people talk about London, the South East. You speak to people in Leeds and Manchester. You speak to any young person in Manchester trying to rent accommodation now, and it's an utter nightmare. So we want to deal with it.
What's the housing shortage in Leeds? Something like about 30,000 by now, isn't it?
Well, it depends on the definition. There's lots of definitions. There's 28,000 people on the housing waiting list at the moment. So no, this is a chronic problem. But just get back on the detail of the numbers. So our proposal is 100,000, which is additional. So this is new capacity. So if the registered social landlords in the private sector continue to build about 100, 180, 160, 180, our 100,000 be on top of that. But I agree with you. I'm going to ask the policy team to look at it because I don't think it's ambitious enough. But you have to bear in mind that you can't create capacity out of thin air. And one of my biggest problems with the government is that people talk about housing and they say, well, we can't do anything about it because we don't have the capacity. And what I'm talking about is the government building the capacity. Part of the role of the housing development corporations, they'll not only have compulsory purchase powers and the power to grant planning permission, and we're funding this by taxing all new housing developments on greenfield sites, the uplift, the planning gain of 50%. We raise about 9 billion off that alone. My view is that we should shrink the housing benefit bill, which is massively out of scale from what we build. We spend 18, 20 billion on housing benefit. We spend about 8 billion currently in total on new housing from the state. So it's completely skewed. We need to correct all that. I'm in favour of it, but you do need to build the capacity. And part of the scheme is having skills colleges. And every single county housing development corporation will have a skills college to literally get kids in and get the skills you need, build the capacity. And then when the public say do something about it, at least the government can say, yes, we are. We actually have the capacity to do it. And that's what I've always resented. I think we're governed by people, as you've said many times, Michael, who regulate and tax, but are useless at actually doing anything. And that's got to stop. If you elect the SDP, we will actually roll our sleeves up and get things done.
Here's another way of doing it. Or in addition, we should be selling housing bonds to finance this thing. So you want to buy a house? Fine, buy some housing bonds. That way, the person who's going to end up buying the house helps fund the training, helps fund the building, helps fund the whole program. And of course, those housing bonds, when the house gets sold, the bonds get paid down, and you can build an enormous amount of financial capacity and therefore infrastructural capacity, supply side capacity using those funds. So let's have a program of construction and housing bonds as well.
Well, let's do it, Michael. I mean, we'll propose it and we'll put it to the public and see what happens. But, you know, we've got to deal with this. I totally agree. It's the UK's biggest domestic macroeconomic problem. I think our trade problem is our biggest external one. But I think domestically, this is the biggest problem. And it's low-hanging fruit. You can do it if you want to do it.
You get housing right, then, you know, Mr. Bailey with his, this is a terrible, you know, low growth situation. No, it's not. You look at private balance sheets, you look at corporate balance sheets, and even household balance sheets, they're in better shape coming out of the pandemic than they've ever been in our lifetime, literally.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people know that, but there was basically a debt jubilee. So the fuel is there. The fuel is there to fund growth. The ambition is not. And as you say, they've stripped out the capacity from the state to help fire this. We've got to get this right, and it's got to be way ambitious, way ambitious. One problem, our big problem, and we will solve it. We will solve it.
Well, let's do it. Now, I'm thoroughly behind this, and I'm going to ask the policy team to have a look at the numbers. I think we've got the structure right. I think we've got the proposal to tax it right. Everything is in position. I agree. We'll look at the scale of it. And perhaps our proposal will be even bigger.
Got one final thought, and you may consider that I've been ranting. So I'm going to dial it down a little bit so that we have this, the SDP has this generational immigration pause. Why not? But yet, you know, clearly we're going to have some sort of level of immigration. Why not say, okay, the level of acceptable immigration we're going to have for the coming year is going to be based on last year's house build. So if we built 100,000 houses, well, maybe 25K immigrants. If we build 500,000 houses, well, maybe 100,000, you know, but recognize that capacity is the key. And that if you simply let immigration rip without expanding capacity, you are not solving problems, you are creating them.
Well, I agree entirely, Michael, with your description of the problem there. I think we've been trying to link any link between immigration, gross immigration numbers to housing for a long time. And even some of the pressure groups like Shelter are in complete denial about this, and they refuse to imagine. I mean, I was asked, you know, are you enumerate? Can you count? Where do you expect these immigrants to live, and what do you think is going to happen? So it's insane. We try and link it all the time, but actually, as a policy, I need persuading. I think I'm not in general in favour of hypothecating linking policy too much, because I think you can get yourself into problems and cause all sorts of difficulties. But yes, certainly we've got to get this on the agenda. You can't just import 1.4 million people and scratch your head and recklessly not bother to build any houses. Is disastrous.
Okay, well, let's just leave this with just, I want to get bang down this data before the war, 1930s, Britain had a population of about 48 million, roughly. Okay, I mean, presumably they could even manage to count it in those days. let's say it was 48 million, and they're building 333,000 houses a year. Here we are, 2023. We've got a population that we don't even know what it is, but you're probably talking upwards of 70 million, and we're building about 164,000 houses a year. It's absolutely pathetic. It's an abnegation of a basic fundamental responsibility, and it is the source of an awful lot of our problems that can be solved.
Well, let's address it and try and offer that up to the British public next year and see what they say.